Welcome back to Dark Frontier. You already know the story of the doomed maiden voyage of the Titanic. But what if we told you the truth of this disaster was just the tip of the iceberg? Was the Titanic actually another ship in disguise? A clever plot to stage a disaster, only to fall victim to a real one? Were her passengers haunted by the curse of a mummy? Or was the Titanic merely a pawn in a decade-spanning chess game by a clandestine New World Order regime to establish the Federal Reserve and ignite World War I? There are no lifeboats aboard, so don't abandon ship as we set sail into the dark frontier. The dawn of the 20th century. They called it the Ship of Dreams. But dreams all too often can turn into nightmares. And nightmares are all the more chilling when they have some basis in the real world. On the night of April 14th, 1912, the Titanic's maiden voyage from Southampton, England to New York City took the ocean liner through the North Atlantic Ocean, some 370 miles south of Newfoundland. Just before midnight, 2,400 passengers were jolted from their peaceful sleep into a living nightmare. The Titanic struck a jagged iceberg, which didn't manage to penetrate the ship's hull, but did cause its seams to buckle under the weight of the tremendous blow. For the next 2 hours, the sounds of ripping metal, bursting pipes, desperate screams, and unanswered prayers fell silent in the frigid blackness of the North Atlantic. 1,600 occupants lost their lives that night, several of which were wealthy industrialists traveling in the greatest luxury ship ever built. But most were third-class immigrants from Ireland or Scandinavia seeking a new life across the ocean. The sinking of the RMS Titanic was perhaps the most shocking and tragic maritime disaster in history, and the ship has been a household name ever since that fateful night. But the Titanic's legacy casts a long, dark shadow, a shadow as black as the midnight ocean, swallowing this seemingly simple story of hubris and an unsinkable ship, with conspiracies ranging from the budding foundation of a new world order to the curse of an ancient Egyptian priestess. These theories may range from the plausible to the, honestly, downright preposterous, but each of them seems to contain a hint of truth that has lent them credibility and kept the myths surrounding the Titanic alive for over 100 years. Here's one to start. Was the Titanic's fate foretold by precognizance? Author William Stead went down with the mighty Titanic. But before that, he penned not one but two stories about a world-class ship meeting its end in the Atlantic Ocean, with both stories detailing their doomed voyages, lack of lifeboats, and collision with an iceberg. Another story, one that chillingly mirrors the fate of the Titanic, was almost too eerily similar to be a coincidence. The Wreck of the Titan, or Futility, was published in 1898 by American author and self-proclaimed inventor of the periscope, seriously, William Robertson. In this story, the grandiose ocean liner Titan is crossing the Atlantic when it collides with a massive iceberg in the dead of night, with not enough lifeboats to safely evacuate until it is saved by a nearby ship. Robertson's Titan and the real-world Titanic were even nearly the same exact size, down to roughly 50 feet, some 10 years before the Titanic was even constructed. Robertson also wrote a story about a war between the Empire of Japan and the United States that started with a sneak attack by Japan on a naval fleet stationed in Hawaii. What are the odds, right? One of the most prevalent theories surrounding the Titanic is the Olympic exchange, popularized by Robin Gardner in his 1998 book, The Ship That Never Sank, suggesting that it was not the Titanic, but its sister ship, the Olympic, that sank in 1912 as part of a massive insurance scam conducted by J.P. Morgan and the White Star Line Shipping Company. Gardner's theory begins in the opening years of the 20th century. British company White Star Line was fighting a losing battle with Cunard Steamship Company. For every brand new cruise liner White Star could make, Cunard's would dwarf them in size and speed. In 1906 and 1907, Cunard sent the world's largest recorded passenger ships, the Lusitania and the Mauretania, On their maiden voyages, White Star and Cunard's battle turned into a war. Money wasn't going to be an issue, of course, as White Star Line was bankrolled by the International Mercantile Marine Company, a holding company financed by a man named J.P. Morgan. J.P. Morgan was a titan of the Gilded Age. He dominated Wall Street and took control of several industries America is built on today, including U.S. Steel, Western Harvest, and General Electric. Morgan gave White Star chairman Bruce Ismay permission to pursue his plans for an Olympic fleet. Luxurious, massive ships that would finally put Cunard's line to shame. Cunard's ships could be faster and bigger, but those came at the cost of furnishings, comfort, and lavish decadence. White Star's diamond-encrusted, gold-gilded Olympic line would outshine Cunard's unadorned vessels. They would be faster, bigger, and they would become world-class resorts that allowed their guests to travel in luxury and style. The fleet's namesake, the Olympic, had completed 4 unanimously successful voyages, but the 5th was where White Star Line, and history as we know it, was altered forever. On September 20th, 1911, off Cowles and the island of Wight, the Olympic ran into a passing military vessel, the HMS Hawk. Attempting to navigate around the Hawk, the Olympic made an unexpected turn, causing a large amount of water to be displaced and generating a suction that drew the Hawk in, causing the ships to collide. Both ships were able to make it back to port, but the trial was disastrous for White Star. They were held responsible and thus would not be able to collect any insurance on the incident. White Star's $7.5 million ship would be a financial disaster to replace, even with J.P. Morgan's pocketbook. The solution was simple. They would give the Olympic the name of her twin sister, the Virgin ship Titanic. This fake Titanic would be sent out to sea to wreck, allowing White Star to collect the insurance payout of a brand new ship, versus one that had already been the subject of a disastrous accident. But why go to such lengths, and how could they have possibly predicted the iceberg? The answer seems to be that quite simply they didn't. The fake Titanic encountered a fatal freak accident on the way to the orchestrated accident that would seemingly have ensured the crew and passengers' survival, lined White Star's pockets, and provided some good, sympathetic PR in the process. In Gardner's Titanic Olympic theory, he cites historical evidence regarding the timeline of the Titanic's voyage. The Titanic was set to arrive to much fanfare and celebration on Wednesday, April 17th. But the ship had been picking up tremendous speed, which would have put it in New York on Tuesday, a day ahead of schedule and without the cheering, rapturous crowds and press. Several survivors' testimonies and the ship's charts seem to back up this claim. The ship was ahead of schedule, but wouldn't White Star want the red carpet for their prized new luxury liner's maiden voyage, which would already be arriving in New York in record time regardless? Why was the Titanic in such a hurry? Where was it going? Gardner's theory posits that the Titanic's crew and White Star Line was aware of another vessel out of Europe that would be traveling a similar route, the SS Californian, out of Liverpool en route to New Orleans. The fake Titanic would be sabotaged at sea in time for the Californian to unwittingly aid in White Star's massive gamble, arriving just in time to save the passengers and crew. So was the fake Titanic, the Olympic, in a hurry to close the distance and ensure that they would cross paths with the Californian, and have everyone on shore in time for White Star to pop their champagne and toast, in private, to their success? After all, White Star could bear the bad press of a sunken ship if they could tote that everyone on board lived to tell the tale. Don't go down with the ship. Stay afloat in a sea of the unknown and let Dark Frontier guide you to your next destination. Where are we going? Only one way to find out. Like this video and subscribe to our channel for more. Our next theory suggests that it wasn't insurance fraud that sank the Titanic, rather J.P. Morgan's bid for financial control of the United States. Among those on board the Titanic's doomed maiden voyage were some of the wealthiest men in the world. specifically real estate magnate John Jacob Astor IV and American businessman Benjamin Guggenheim. But what did these men have in common besides their wealth? The opposition of J.P. Morgan's shadowy society and their machinations for a centralized bank, the U.S. Federal Reserve System. J.P. Morgan and his cabal of uber elite had allegedly formed the basis of the Federal Reserve System with connections to the mysterious Rothschild Group, a shadowy family said to be pulling the strings in the world's financial markets, even manipulating global conflicts for their financial gain. The Federal Reserve was established officially 1 year after the disaster. It's worth mentioning that J.P. Morgan allegedly canceled his booking for the Millionaire Suite at the last possible minute, despite fanfare from his estate about how excited he was, as one of the men behind the ship and the company, to partake in this journey. Then, in 1915, the Cunard ocean liner ship, the Lusitania, would be the subject of a pivotal disaster, to which many attribute the start of the United States' involvement in World War I. With some theorizing that J.P. Morgan himself was once again pulling the strings, using another freak disaster to alter the course of history for his clandestine handlers. The Lusitania was a passenger ship from Cunard that was approaching the old head of Kinsale, Ireland, with 1,266 souls aboard, 125 of which were Americans. The vessel ventured into a maritime war zone, which was a known site of submarine warfare against the ships of the United Kingdom by Germany, after the Allies' implementation of a blockade against Germany and the other Central Powers. The press declared the sinking of the Lusitania a war crime, a ruthless act of aggression costing innocent lives. But the Lusitania wasn't an innocent passenger ship, according to one historian. G. Edward Griffin, author of The Creature from Jekyll Island, a book about the shadowy origins of the U.S. Federal Reserve being a front for the Rothschild family and their agents, such as Morgan. Griffin proposes that Morgan was profiting off both sides of the war at the time, with England and France borrowing heavily to fund their war machines. Morgan acted as a purchasing and sales agent, essentially allowing him to profit twice, once when the money was borrowed, and then again when it was spent. Eventually, however, the war started to take its toll financially. The war began to go badly for the Allies when Germany's submarine fleet took virtual control of the Atlantic shipping lanes. As England and France moved closer to defeat or a peace treaty at the feet of Germany's war machine, it became more and more difficult to sell their bonds. This cut into J.P. Morgan's revenue. The only way to save the British Empire, thus restoring the value of the bonds and sustaining J.P. Morgan's cash flow, was continued war. Morgan began buying control in various news conglomerates throughout the nation, spreading anti-German sentiment as fast as possible, attempting to sway the public into making Germany the enemy. Morgan had created an international shipping cartel, including Germany's merchant fleet, which maintained a near monopoly on the high seas. Only the British Cunard lines were still independent. Sound familiar? Already a dire enemy of Morgan's, Cunard lines found themselves a pawn in a sinister game. Morgan had allegedly purchased 600 tons of pyroxylene, or gun cotton, a highly combustible explosive element, and had it shipped with the Lusitania, itself a former armed merchant cruiser. The German embassy had somehow been made aware of Morgan's explosive cargo, making the ship a priority target for the German Navy. They attempted to warn any Americans they could that the ship would be considered a wartime threat if it approached the blockade, and that it would be fired upon. How did they plan to warn the American passengers and the public as a whole? Through newspaper ads. And who controlled the papers? The Lusitania departed from New York on May 1st, 1915. 6 days later, it would be sunk by the German Navy. Then, in April of 1917, the US would join the Great War, with a publicly declared mission to avenge the lives lost on the Lusitania, and J.P. Morgan's wealth continued to grow, now profiting from all possible angles across two sides of the war. Is this conspiracy hearsay, or are there a few too many coincidences to ignore? This next theory around the Titanic is a little less Morgan and a little more mummy. Did the curse of a forgotten 21st century woman from Thebes, in the waning years of Egyptian rule, sink the Titanic? After her wrath followed an American occultist across the Atlantic? The particulars of this one are debated among historians, but the tale of the unlucky mummy, or priestess from the College of Amun-Ra, goes as follows. In Egypt, in the late 1890s, several English explorers unearthed a mummy in Thebes that was sealed with a warning that whoever disturbed the body would be cursed. Of course, misfortune followed the explorers. Upon returning to Cairo, one of the members of the party was shot in the arm accidentally by his servant. The gun the servant was holding was said to have exploded without visible cause. The man's arm had to be amputated. A third was shot, also under mysterious circumstances, and died. The owner of the mummy case found upon reaching Cairo that he had lost much of his fortune and died shortly thereafter. Another would die in poverty within a year. The case was brought back to London, where it found itself in the British National Museum, where it proceeded to wreak havoc there as well. A photographer attempting to capture the case in its full glory was pleased with his shoot and went to his lab to develop the pictures, only to reportedly see an image so terrifying and disturbing in the developed photos that he would take his own life. The museum guards would hear wailing screams at night and see images of the priestess gliding through the halls, with a twisted visage, snarling in pain and malice at her new home. A museum caretaker similarly was so distraught by visions he would have of the priestess that he too would kill himself out of fear and misery. Finally, in an effort to rid themselves of the artifact, the museum sold it to an occult-obsessed journalist named William Stead. He took the artifact to America on board the Titanic, and of course, misfortune followed. This story spread thanks to a survivor recounting that Stead had told him this cursed mummy story, and he believed that to be the cause of the ship's watery fate. The truth of the matter, though, is that the artifact never left the British Museum. It's still on display to this day, and no record of it, even if it had left, was ever on the ship's manifest. However, the unsinkable Molly Brown, one of the Titanic's celebrity survivors, portrayed most famously in the 1997 film by Kathy Bates, was carrying some interesting artifacts from Egypt. Molly Brown, an American socialite and heiress to a vast mining empire, was on vacation in Europe when she received word that her son was ill. She booked the first ship back, the Titanic. Brown had reportedly visited the great and mysterious lands of Egypt, where she had collected several artifacts with the intent to donate them to the Denver Nature and Science Museum. Allegedly, after taking these artifacts, she was told to stay away from water. Clearly, in Molly Brown fashion, she defied that warning. One of the items in Brown's possession was an ushabti, which she kept on her for luck. In Egyptian lore, an ushabti is a small object shaped like a mummified human. They are supposedly the spirits of servants. They would accompany men and women of great power, wealth, and importance into the afterlife, and are inscribed with texts from the Egyptian Book of the Dead. During the disaster, Brown took the ushabti with her, down into the freezing waters of the Atlantic, and aboard one of the lifeboats that had been used during the Titanic's rescue by the Carpathia. Brown gave the ushabti to the Carpathia's captain as a debt of gratitude for saving her life. Brown, obsessed with Egypt, has sphinxes guarding her home to this day in Denver. Her house is considered one of the most haunted locations in the city, filled with cursed artifacts that followed Brown from her travels. Did Molly unwittingly bring devastation with her aboard the Titanic? And if so, do these spirits still haunt her home to this day? So, was it Egyptian curses, a murderous plot, an insurance scam, misfortune predicted by precognizance, or just plain bad luck that sank the Titanic? Or was it just an iceberg in ignorance? The mysteries that surround the ship's fate are more vast than the pits of the sea that swallowed it. As time goes on, the ship slowly deteriorates on the sea floor, soon to be nothing but disturbed sand. That too, in time, will return to normal. Will these theories and speculations eventually dissolve? Will new ones be posited as time goes on? Or will we never know what really happened to the Titanic?